welcome to this video series about Cosmos Hub and building on Cosmos Hub, and for taking our time out of your Cosmos schedule. I think to begin with, it'll be great if you can give us an intro about you, what are you building, and what's your role in the project.
Yeah, I'm Avril, also known as Spade, and I'm the co-founder of Neutron, the integrated finance network. What Neutron does, in a few words, is effectively take smart contracts and give them superpowers. We enable people to build 10x better applications than they would be able to do so on other networks by giving them access to infrastructure that no other networks does, right? So in protocol oracles, order books, and other functionalities, cross-chain infrastructure and such, which is designed to enable developers to build better applications.
How did you discover and start exploring in the Cosmos ecosystem?
We're kind of originally from the Cosmos ecosystem. Our team was kind of like birthed as part of P2P, which is a Cosmos ICO participant, a OG validator on the Cosmos Hub, as well as like a number of networks around the space. We built DeFi applications in Cosmos for a long time. Our CTO actually implemented a randomness beacon in Tendermint, I think in 2018 or so. And so we've kind of like always been around, and the Cosmos thesis was something that always resonated with us. And so in 2 years ago, when there was this opportunity, like ICS was getting started, and we saw the lack of like a really great platform for smart contract app-based applications to exist, we saw an opportunity to sort of like address this gap and like enable much faster innovation to happen on top of like IBC and these other primitives than what would be otherwise possible with pure app chain development for applications, if that makes sense.
I also read about the integrated applications, that's the recent launch on Neutron. How do you think that's super important for not just like onboarding new users, but also new projects to start building on top of Neutron?
I think the main idea, right, is if you look at Ethereum, Solana, Arbitrum, and other networks, right, they value fairly lofty ideas such as like credible neutrality above pure product excellence, right? And as a result of this, it's a valuable concept, but as a result of this, they're unable to provide the best possible infrastructure to really open up the field of what is possible to build in DeFi. And as a result of this, there's an opportunity to sort of like address this and help push crypto and crypto application development to kind of like the next stage of iterations, make more capital efficient, more accessible protocols, and bring them to the ecosystem. And this is kind of like, it resonates strongly, in my opinion, with the Cosmos thesis of like, there's this quote of like, if you're serious about building software, like you want to own the whole stack. And like basically what Neutron does is like enable you to have access to the whole stack without actually having to maintain it, if that makes sense. And so, the idea is like you can build better apps and you can focus more on your product, because we are sort of like, this servant leader position as a network DAO of doing all of the hard works of like developing, iterating on, and maintaining that infrastructure for you so that you can take it and actually bring it to market with like applications, if that makes sense.
Yes.
It enables effectively the creation of applications that are like more capital efficient, more accessible than you would ever be able to create on like Solana or Ethereum, Arbitrum and such, because they will never have these sort of like design choices and these pieces of infrastructure that we will sort of like make accessible to you, if that makes sense.
Well, since you've been watching and building on Cosmos for a long time, do you think in the coming 1 or 2 years, what is it something that cosmonauts can watch out for as as a new milestone or something that would really grow Cosmos?
I think the work being done about like on IBC Eureka is really interesting. One of the big problems that Cosmos has had is like distribution and access to liquidity, and a function like this is partially a function of it sort of like functioning as kind of like this bubble, whereby connectivity between Cosmos chains is extremely high. Like the IBC is very developed and well sort of like spread across app chains, but it doesn't really connect well to or at all to any other networks, right? Like like Solana, Ethereum, and such. And so like, it does so through like hubs and third parties, right? But like being able to like interface directly with these networks where like most of the liquidity reside today, I think is like a potentially really exciting unlock in both like functionality as well as just like go-to-market distribution and such.
Since you work with a lot of developers, what makes like a lot of developers bullish about building using Cosmos SDK compared to like other blockchain, like peer blockchains and like counterparts of sorts, like Polkadot or Solana.
Yeah, I think what's exciting about the Cosmos SDK is like the flexibility that you get, right? If you're serious about building something really ambitious, then you can pretty much do anything with the Cosmos SDK, assuming that you have the time and resources to do it, right? And yeah, I think that's like the ultimate strength of the stack, right? It's the most mature, featureful, but also like versatile stack that exists today.
So we'll jump into these questions about ICS governance a little bit. Since you've been being part of and watching over how intelligence security has unfolded, how important do you think is about for cross-chain collaboration, and will it really be super pivotal in bringing on projects and making them use of Hub's resources more efficiently?
I think there's major challenges in terms of distribution for ICS as a product. I think the Hub's team were tremendously early to the market in the sense that like ICS is like the, like people today talk about like restaking. I think ICS to a large extent is a victim of a pattern that we've seen play out in Cosmos numerous times, which is like great innovative forward-thinking ideas get imagined in Cosmos, but they get actually commercialized or taken to market elsewhere. I think ICS and restaking with EigenLayer and Symbiotic is a great example of this happening. One thing that I think the Hub has been excellent with is technological development and product orientation. But I think in terms of go-to-market and such, we've definitely not been able to build nearly as strong of a platform as other projects have. And I think this is going to hinder its ability to really onboard chains. Although I'm very interested to see how permissionless ICS and Forge are going to change this. I think the ability to easily launch chains is something that is really synergistic with the general Cosmos vision. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how that actually plays out, because I think that that actually is really interesting in terms of development.
So governance is very crucial to Cosmos and the direction it moves in, and I think it's something it's very well known for. What are some proposals that you remember very clearly being sort of voting on and following the discussions, and what are your views on the Cosmos governance?
Proposals that I remember, I think Prop 69, Prop 72, Prop 792, the ATOM 2.0 prop, and others were kind of memorable. So for context, those are the first Cosmos on the Hub prop, the proposal to bring ICS to market by sponsoring 3 chains, of which Neutron was a part, became a part of, the proposal to launch Neutron, the proposal for ATOM 2.0, and a few others. I think were really landmark proposals on the Hub. My take on Cosmos governance is that governance as a concept is, and as a field of study, is absolutely fascinating. I don't think we've nearly scratched the surface of what is possible. And I think one of the good ways of measuring whether our governance systems are well designed is, do they enable our DAOs to make decisions that are more qualitative? And do they allow our DAOs to make decisions more efficiently in terms of time, resources invested in each decision, right? In this regard, I think that having stuck with token voting for everything is suboptimal, because it requires tremendous effort from the community, validator set, and all participants basically for each minute decision. It also requires tremendous education effort, right? Because to make an informed decision, you need to actually understand what the topic is, right? And so that creates tremendous cost on everyone for every single decision. In reality, I think there are some decisions that make a lot of sense for basically committees of experts to basically take. When they're purely technical questions, I think it's fine for delegating that authority to committees. What I think is more interesting in the context of the governance discussion there is how do we enforce visibility, transparency, accountability? How do we ensure that there's the right guardrails so that if the committees do not perform or become malicious, we're able to sanction that and take over the roles and such, and delegate and such, right? I think there's a lot of really interesting developments that can happen there. In general, I also think that there can be an excess of governance. Not everything needs to be voted on. The systems that we're trying to build are systems that are resistant to adversarial environments, and putting humans in the loop at every turn, it can add to vectors of fragility, right? And so I'm a big believer in the idea of governance minimization. If you don't need a human in the loop, just don't have a human in the loop, right? And then for everything else, like treasury management and such, you do need to have humans in the loop. And so in that case, you can think about like different ways of making decisions, right? Like token voting is very interesting for like kind of like political issues that affect like all stakeholders of the network. For technical issues, you can have committees that are accountable to the token holders. And I also think that like in general, like there will be welcome experimentations around like, proof of humanity and such that will enable different models than just token voting, which has downsides in terms of like the ability to collude and the ability to like represent like conflicts of interest in the decision-making process. So yeah, I think on-chain governance is a really interesting field of study. I think we've not really we've not gone nearly deep enough into like governance design and creation. I think this is partially a function of building governance in the SDK level, which is harder, more expensive to iterate upon, rather than the smart contract level, which is way more flexible. And I think DAO, for example, is like a really interesting project in this regard because it does enable like way more innovative approaches to governance, if that makes sense. So bullish on the fact that it's now on the hub.
Since you mentioned about governance and we need to minimize governance when it's not needed, I also wanted to just add the question about Hydro, because that's, at least from like one perspective, to bring liquidity and to bid on liquidity using a governance mechanism that's faster than your usual method that's followed by chains, which is you put up a proposal, then it's voted. What do you think about that?
That's a really good question. I think I have strong thoughts about Hydro. I want to preface that I can definitely be wrong, and I would love to be proven wrong. I think Hydro is going in the right direction. I think like this is exactly what the hub needs to do. E.g., Hydro is the hub's investment, and and it's great work into investing into creating better decision making for a specific thing that the hub frequently does. In this case, like managing liquidity. So this is like the idea is perfect. Like this is exactly what the hub should be doing. Like the hub's core team and community and such. That's the first thing. The second thing is I'm not sure about the specific mechanism that was chosen, because to a large extent Hydro is built upon the idea of VE tokenomics and Curve's model. The reason why it works or worked for Curve is because the incentives are always going, in Curve's model, the incentives are always going to go to a Curve pool. The risk of Curve pools is fairly homogeneous, right? They're kind of all the same thing, and the fees of Curve pools always go to Curve, right? And so you have this kind of homogeneity of parameters that allow the protocol to care a lot less about where the incentives end up going, right? So as a result of this, you can let the market kind of do bribes and drive where the incentives go, right? The problem with POL as a concept is that it's a much more complex field of study. That liquidity might go to different types of protocols, different types of DeFi positions, different risks model, different app chains, different validator sets and such. And so it might be bridged through different bridges, and this makes the whole analysis of risk extremely difficult. And it's very unlikely that the market participants will be accurately gauging this. And there's a little bit of a principal agent problem between the capital allocators, whose incentives is to maximize basically the bribes that they're receiving, and the the community pool and stakeholders of the hub who actually owns the liquidity, right? And I think those are tremendous challenges that Hydro is taking steps to mitigate and address through having committees and frameworks for gauging liquidity allocations in the various buckets and such. I think this is interesting, but it kind of shows that there's limit with the general mechanism approach that was chosen initially. I think it's interesting. I'm supportive of the creation of a group of people who think deeply about these issues and report to governance on how it should improve its approach. But I do think that there's challenges in building a market-driven approach to solving this problem. So we'll see. It seems to be getting a lot of attention and traction, which I think is a great thing. I think it will be definitely a valuable experiment to learn about how the hub should go about liquidity management. I do think that ATOM liquidity is something that has demand, and so for the hub to explore how it can become more efficient at distributing this is really interesting.
We'll jump into this rapid fire bit. ATOM is a token. Sell it or compound it?
Stake it with drop.
Why should cosmonauts hold ATOM?
They already do.
No, but why should they?
Because they like the coin.
Okay. What are some of your favorite dApps or tools that are being deployed on the hub?
DAO.
Favorite interchain wallet?
I use Kepler the most, but I think Leap is the most experimental and innovative.
Interchain security in one word?
Restaking.
Who should be the CEO of Cosmos?
No one.
What do you think we need to put a pedal on for Cosmos Hub? Governance or innovation?
In the current state of the hub, they're inextricably tied with one another. There can be nothing done without governance currently. So, okay, third way, product. Like reach PMF first.
Name one challenge that's facing Cosmos Hub right now.
Distribution.
What does Cosmos need to make DeFi better again?
Liquidity and ambition in terms of product design. See my speech on integrated applications. Like, you know, Cosmos is great tech. Now it needs like great products, and for this we as builders, both of networks, app chains, and applications, to be really ambitious with what we try to bring to the market. Like re-implementing stuff that exists on Ethereum is just not sufficient. Like there's no reason why you would use something that is equivalent on Cosmos when you can just have access to more liquidity and like the initial thing like on Ethereum. Like we have access to like incredibly powerful technologies that only matters if we're able to turn this into incredibly powerful products that like are way better than the competition. So we need to be more ambitious and we need to be ruthless about distributing these products. So yeah.
If you were to choose one metric that people can or cosmonauts can use to track the progress of the Cosmos Hub over time, what would you choose?
Yeah, IBC volume.
A dark horse or an underrated project in Cosmos?
Mars.
We'll just end with, if you have a catchphrase for building on the hub.
You never thought it was possible.
Amazing. Okay, that's a wrap. Thanks so much.